It was a crisp Sunday morning in early December 2023, the kind of Texas winter day where the air carries just enough chill to remind you the holidays are near. Grace Community Church, in a peaceful suburb on the outskirts of Dallas, stood filled with nearly 300 faithful souls, their voices rising in hymn before the sermon began. That was the moment my own son, Thomas Harper, rose from his seat near the back and strode purposefully toward the front. He took the microphone from Pastor David Edwards with a confidence that bordered on arrogance and declared to the entire congregation, "Pastor, I have to speak a truth here today. This man sitting in the front row is nothing but a complete fraud. He takes advantage of the good faith of brothers and sisters in this church, borrowing money left and right with no intention of ever paying it back. He's destitute. Yet he sits here pretending to be a devout believer just to scam more people." He pointed directly at me, his own father, with a finger that trembled only slightly from the audacity of his words. The sanctuary plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence. You could have heard a single page of a Bible turn in that moment. 300 pairs of eyes shifted from Thomas to me, some wide with shock, others narrowed in judgment, a few filled with pity. My 9-year-old granddaughter, Emily, who sat beside me clutching her little pink purse, tugged urgently at my sleeve. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice small and confused. "Why is Daddy saying those awful things about you?" I felt the heat of every stare burning into my skin. My hand enveloped her tiny one, and in that instant, as I held the innocence of a child, amid the storm of public humiliation, I never could have foreseen that Thomas had just signed his own irreversible sentence. Because what my son did not know, what he had never bothered to learn in all his 40 years, was that he had just publicly branded as a scammer the very man who had single-handedly sustained Grace Community Church for the past 15 years through quiet, anonymous generosity. My name is William James Harper. I am 72 years old. I have been a widower for 5 long years since my beloved Sarah was taken from me. And on that fateful Sunday in December 2023, I discovered in the most excruciating way imaginable that the boy I had poured my entire life into raising was capable of standing in the house of God and humiliating his own father before hundreds of witnesses. Have you ever experienced the bitter, metallic taste of betrayal delivered by the person you love more than life itself? That moment when the child you carried in your heart before he ever drew breath, the one for whom you sacrificed sleep, dreams, and every spare dollar to educate and elevate, suddenly looks upon you as nothing more than a parasite, a burden, an embarrassment to be discarded, I assure you. It is a flavor that coats the tongue and refuses to wash away, no matter how many years pass. So I invite you to stay with this story until its very end, if even a single moment stirs something deep within your soul. Leave a comment below and tell me precisely what moved you. And while you're there, let me know from which corner of the world you are watching. I genuinely enjoy knowing who is on the other side of these words. Take a moment, too, to subscribe to Revenge with Thomas. A new story arrives every single day, and perhaps the one waiting for you tomorrow is the exact message your heart has been longing to hear. Public humiliation has always been my absolute, non-negotiable red line ever since Sarah passed away. During the 47 sacred years of our marriage, she would often pull me aside after a disagreement and say with quiet steel in her voice, "William, you may correct me as much as you need within the walls of our home, but never, ever humiliate me in front of other people. That kind of shame kills a person slowly from the inside out." When aggressive cancer finally claimed her in the autumn of 2018, I stood at her graveside under a gray Texas sky and swore a solemn oath to her memory that I would never again allow anyone to strip me of my dignity in public. Yet on that Sunday morning, my own flesh and blood shattered that promise in the one place I believed was sanctuary, the house of the Lord. Allow me to paint a clear picture of who William Harper truly is, so that you may understand the depth of the irony and the pain. I was born in the spring of 1951 in a tiny, sun-baked farming community just beyond the city limits of Lubbock, in the heart of West Texas. My father, James Harper, spent his days bent over cotton rows under a relentless sun, earning pennies for back-breaking labor. My mother, Ruth Harper, took in laundry from the wealthier families in town, scrubbing stains from fine linens with hands that never knew the luxury of lotion. We were poor in material things, but we were rich in honesty, faith, and the unbreakable bond of family. That honesty became the cornerstone of every value I would ever hold dear. At the tender age of 14, I boarded a rattling Greyhound bus bound for Dallas with nothing but a battered cardboard suitcase tied with twine and exactly $20 folded carefully in my pocket. The big city was overwhelming, towering buildings, endless traffic, the constant hum of ambition. I walked the downtown streets until my feet blistered, knocking on doors until Mr. Hiroshi Tanaka, owner of a modest corner grocery called Tanaka's Market, took pity on a scrawny kid with determination in his eyes. He hired me as a stock boy at minimum wage, and that humble beginning became the foundation of everything that followed. Mr. Tanaka, a gentle Japanese man who had immigrated to America in the aftermath of World War II, became my first true mentor outside my parents. He would lean over the counter during slow afternoons and say, "William, remember this always honest work is worth infinitely more than easy money. You may be poor for a season, but dishonesty is a permanent poverty of the soul that no amount of cash can cure." Those words etched themselves into my heart. I remained at Tanaka's Market for 8 solid years. I started by sweeping floors and stocking shelves at dawn. But through sheer diligence, I learned every facet of the business: how to negotiate with produce suppliers, how to rotate inventory to minimize waste, how to schedule employees so that no shift was ever short-staffed. Most importantly, I learned that small neighborhood stores survive and thrive on 3 pillars: unwavering trust with customers, genuine relationships with the community, and relentless hard work day in and day out. By the time I left, I had risen to store manager, and Mr. Tanaka treated me like the son he never had. It was in the summer of 1973, when I was 22 years old, that I first laid eyes on Sarah Elizabeth Brooks. She was 19, working as a seamstress in a garment factory 2 blocks from the market. Every weekday at precisely 12:30, she would walk through our doors to purchase a loaf of fresh bread for the ladies at the shop. And every single day, I would invent some flimsy excuse to be at the front counter when she arrived, rearranging the candy display, wiping an already spotless surface, anything to steal a few extra seconds in her presence. Sarah had chestnut brown hair that she always wore twisted into a practical bun, a shy smile that could light up the dimmest corner of the store, and hands calloused from endless hours bent over a sewing machine. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. But it wasn't merely physical beauty that captivated me. It was the quiet sweetness that radiated from her soul, the genuine kindness that sparkled in her warm hazel eyes like sunlight on a rippling pond. It took me 3 full months to summon the courage to speak to her beyond the usual good afternoon. "Miss Sarah, and thank you for your purchase." Then one fateful noon, she arrived with eyes swollen and red from crying. My heart clenched. "Is something wrong?" "Miss Sarah," I asked, genuine concern lacing every syllable. She hesitated, then whispered, "My mother is ill, Mr. William, and the doctor prescribed medicine I cannot afford right now." Without a second thought, I opened the cash register, counted out the exact amount, and pressed the bills into her trembling hand. "Take this. Pay me back whenever you can." She stared at me in stunned disbelief. "But you barely know me." I smiled softly. "I know enough to see that you are a good person, and good people always honor their debts." The very next day, she returned not only with the money, but with a handwritten note on delicate stationery. "Thank you for trusting a stranger. Please allow me to repay your kindness with a home-cooked Sunday lunch." That simple meal of spaghetti and garlic bread, eaten around a scarred wooden table in the tiny house she shared with her ailing mother, tasted more exquisite than any gourmet feast I have ever experienced in the finest restaurants of Dallas. We dated for 2 careful, joyful years. I continued saving every possible penny from my modest salary. Sarah sewed late into the night after her factory shifts to help support her mother's medical bills. Our courtship was simple but rich in meaning a leisurely walk through Clyde Warren Park holding hands, sharing a single ice cream cone on a park bench, catching an afternoon matinee at the old Majestic Theater when we had a few extra quarters to spare. Love, we discovered, does not require extravagance. It only requires presence. In January 1975, on a quiet evening in her mother's living room, I dropped to one knee with a modest engagement ring that had cost me 3 full months of wages. "Sarah, I don't have much to offer you right now," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I promise I will work every day of my life to make you happy and to build a future worthy of your love." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered yes. And in that moment, we both knew we were stepping into a life built on abundant love and precious little money. We married that March in a heartfelt ceremony at Shepherd's Gate Church in downtown Dallas. The sanctuary was small, the guest list limited to immediate family and a handful of close friends. The reception, a potluck dinner in the church fellowship hall. Our honeymoon was a modest weekend escape to Galveston Island, where we stayed in a cozy inn 1 block from the beach and walked the surf at sunset, dreaming aloud about the family we would one day raise. Our first home together was a cramped 1-bedroom apartment on a busy thoroughfare near the market. The rent consumed fully half of my paycheck, but it was ours, and we filled it with laughter and hope. Sarah continued sewing piecework from home to supplement our income. I poured every ounce of energy into the store. Then, in 1976, opportunity knocked in the form of retirement. Mr. Tanaka, now 68 and weary from decades of dawn-to-dusk labor, pulled me aside one afternoon. "William, my boy, you already run this market better than I ever did. If you want to buy it, I will make the terms easy for you." The asking price was $50,000, a staggering sum for a young couple with no collateral beyond grit and determination. I had managed to save $8,000 through frugal living, but it was nowhere near enough. Sarah, ever my pillar of strength, looked me in the eyes and said, "William, you have studied this business for 10 years. If you do not take the leap now, when will you ever?" Together we approached the bank, putting our tiny apartment up as collateral for a loan that terrified us both. It was an enormous risk, but it was the gamble that would forever alter the trajectory of our lives. In January 1977, at the age of 26, I signed the papers and became the proud owner of Harper's Mark, a name I chose to honor both the Texas city where we honeymooned and Sarah's maiden name, Brooks, which I quietly adapted into the business identity. The first years of ownership were brutal, I worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when inventory demanded it. Sarah handled the bookkeeping late into the evening after completing her sewing orders. We snatched lunch together behind the counter when customer flow allowed. Dinner was often eaten at home past 11 o'clock. Exhausted but grateful. Yet the business flourished. I applied every lesson Mr. Tanaka had ever taught me: treat every customer like family, maintain the highest quality products, price fairly, and above all, build trust that lasts generations. By 1979, we had paid off the bank loan in full. In 1981, we purchased our first true house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a quiet Dallas neighborhood where children played in the streets until the streetlights flickered on. And then, in September 1983, our son Thomas James Harper was born, holding that tiny, squirming bundle in the delivery room, gazing into Sarah's exhausted but radiant eyes. I experienced a joy so profound, it felt as though my heart might burst. Our family, we believed, was now complete. But that happiness was cruelly short-lived. 3 months after Thomas's birth, Sarah began hemorrhaging severely, a rare but life-threatening postpartum complication. She spent 2 agonizing weeks in intensive care, hovering between life and death. During those dark days, with a newborn at home and my wife fighting for survival, I learned to be both father and mother simultaneously. I hired a part-time clerk to cover the store and divided my remaining hours between diaper changes, bottle feedings, and hospital vigils. Sarah eventually recovered, but the doctors delivered a devastating verdict: another pregnancy would almost certainly be fatal for her. Thomas would remain our only child. Every ounce of parental love, every dream, every resource we possessed would be channeled into giving him the world we never had. We enrolled him in the best private schools Dallas offered. He wore clothes from upscale department stores, played with toys that lit up and sang, traveled to Disney World and the Grand Canyon, attended summer camps where he learned sailing and horseback riding. In 1985, I opened a second Harper's Market in a growing suburb. In 1988, a third location followed in a bustling commercial district. With each expansion, our financial comfort increased. Yet Sarah and I clung fiercely to our simple philosophy: reinvest profits into the business, live modestly, and build a rock-solid foundation for the family's future. Thomas grew up accompanying me to the stores every Saturday. I wanted him to witness firsthand where our comforts originated from the sweat of honest labor, from greeting the same customers by name year after year, from the daily grind that turned dreams into reality. When he was 8 years old, eyeing the gleaming SUVs parked outside his private school, he asked, "Dad, why don't we have a bigger, fancier car like my friend's parents?" I knelt to his level and replied, "Son, we purchase what we need, not what will impress strangers. Spending money to make others envious is the fastest way to bankrupt both your wallet and your character." But as the years unfolded, I began to notice subtle cracks in his perspective. At age 12, he begged me not to pick him up from school in our reliable but unflashy sedan. At 15, he complained bitterly that our comfortable home was embarrassingly small compared to the sprawling estates of his classmates. Sarah, ever the optimist, would smooth my worries with a gentle hand on my arm. "William, it's just a teenage phase. He will mature and understand." I wanted desperately to believe her, but the signs grew increasingly troubling. Thomas began fabricating stories about our family to his peers. He told them we were food industry executives rather than neighborhood grocers. He invented a vacation home on Lake Texoma, claimed I held an MBA from a prestigious university. The first serious confrontation erupted when he was 17 and announced he wanted to participate in a European student exchange program like several of his wealthier friends. Son, those programs cost tens of thousands of dollars, and you haven't even graduated high school yet. Dad, every single one of my friends is going. I'll be the only one left behind, looking like a loser. Sarah attempted diplomacy. Thomas, once you finish high school and start college, we will discuss international opportunities. But he exploded in frustration. You don't understand. You have no ambition. You're content with this mediocre, small-time life. Mediocre. The word struck me like a physical blow. This boy who had never known hunger, who attended elite schools on our dime, who wanted for nothing dared to label the life we had built through blood and sweat as mediocre. That night, Sarah and I lay awake for hours. We have spoiled him terribly. I confessed, he has lost all sense of the value of things. Sarah, ever hopeful, whispered, "Give him time. William, it is only a difficult adolescent stage. He will grow into gratitude." But it was not a stage. It was the revelation of character. And character, once formed, does not dissolve with the passage of time. Thomas graduated high school in the spring of 2001 and enrolled in the business administration program at Southern Methodist University. I prayed fervently that higher education would instill humility and perspective. Instead, it amplified his arrogance. He began offering unsolicited advice on modernizing the market's digital marketing campaigns, franchise models, aggressive expansion. Dad, you need to think big or you'll be left behind. Son, our business model has sustained this family profitably for over 20 years. We do not abandon what works. His response was a dismissive eye roll. That's exactly why you will never grow. You have a small mentality from the young man who had never worked a single day in his life, who had been handed every advantage on a silver platter. In 2005, he graduated with honors. I offered him a management position at one of the stores, a role that would have given him real responsibility and a generous salary. His reply cut like a blade. Dad, I did not spend 4 years earning a degree to stock shelves in a neighborhood grocery. I have far larger goals than that. As if the enterprise that had paid for his tuition, his car, his lifestyle, was suddenly beneath his refined ambitions. He accepted a junior financial analyst position at a multinational corporation headquartered in downtown Dallas. The salary was impressive, the office gleaming, the dress code suits and ties. Finally, Thomas felt he had arrived among the elite. It was in 2006, during a corporate networking event, that he met Laura Catherine Ellison. She worked in marketing for a firm in the same skyscraper, daughter of prominent attorneys, raised in the affluent Highland Park enclave. Laura was accustomed to country club brunches, European vacations, and a social calendar that revolved around charity galas. When Thomas first brought her home for Sunday dinner, the tension was palpable from the moment she crossed our threshold, our comfortable but unpretentious living room, the simple home-cooked meal of roast chicken and mashed potatoes. The absence of crystal stemware, all of it seemed to register as a personal affront. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, I overheard Laura whisper to Thomas in the hallway, "Your parents are so plain. Are you absolutely sure they can afford a decent wedding?" They dated for 3 years, during which Thomas's visits home grew increasingly infrequent and strained. When he came alone, he seemed perpetually in a hurry, checking his watch every 10 minutes. When he brought Laura, she sat politely but disengaged, scrolling through her phone while Sarah and I attempted conversation about their lives, their dreams, their future. The wedding proposal arrived in the spring of 2009. Dad, Laura and I want to marry in December. It will be a large affair, upscale venue, important guests. Her family has certain expectations. He slid a printed budget across the kitchen table, $80,000. In 2009, that figure represented an entire year's profit from one of our stores. Son, we can host a beautiful celebration for a fraction of that amount without sacrificing joy or elegance. Thomas's face hardened. Dad, please. This is my wedding. I cannot appear cheap or embarrass myself in front of her family and their social circle. Sarah and I debated through the night, weighing love against practicality. It was, after all, our only child's wedding. In the end, we made the agonizing decision to sell one of the Harper's Market locations, the original store where my journey began, to fund the event. We never breathed a word of the sacrifice to Thomas. He assumed the money simply materialized from savings. The wedding was breathtaking. A luxury hotel ballroom dripping with orchids and crystal chandeliers, a gourmet buffet catered by a renowned chef, a 10-piece live orchestra, 200 guests, mostly Laura's extended family, business associates, and society friends. Our side of the aisle looked modest by comparison, loyal store employees in their Sunday best, neighbors who had known Thomas since diapers, cousins from Lubbock in clean but inexpensive suits. They appeared almost out of place amid the opulence. Yet seeing Thomas beam with pride made the financial hemorrhage feel momentarily worthwhile. Our wedding gift to the couple was a 2-week honeymoon touring Paris, Rome, and the Amalfi Coast, another $15,000 that drained our reserves but seemed a fitting capstone to their fairy tale beginning. Upon their return, they rented a sleek high-rise apartment in the upscale Uptown district, where the monthly payment tripled our mortgage. Visits to our home dwindled to once a month, always on Sundays, always rushed. Laura's disinterest was no longer subtle. She spent most of the time texting or browsing social media while Sarah and I peppered Thomas with questions about his promotion, her new job, their future plans. In the spring of 2011, our granddaughter Emily Grace Harper was born. The moment the nurse placed that wrinkled, squalling infant in my arms, I felt the same overwhelming rush of love I had experienced with Thomas. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Now, William, our family is truly complete." We hoped with all our hearts that Emily's arrival would rekindle Thomas's appreciation for family ties, that he would want his daughter to grow up surrounded by the warmth of grandparents who adored her. Instead, the opposite occurred. Thomas and Laura became fiercely protective gatekeepers of Emily's time. "Dad, we prefer all visits be scheduled in advance," Thomas explained during a tense phone call. "Laura gets anxious with drop-ins. The list of rules grew exhaustive, never arrived during nap time. No candy or sweets without explicit permission. Limit visits to 2 hours maximum so as not to overtire the baby." We began to feel like polite strangers petitioning for scraps of access to our own flesh and blood. In 2014, when I was 63 years old, a life-altering offer landed on my desk. A regional supermarket chain approached me with a proposal to purchase all 3 remaining Harper's Market locations for the staggering sum of $8 million. $8 million more money than I had ever dared imagine in my wildest dreams. Sarah and I spent weeks in prayerful discussion. Accepting meant early retirement, ironclad financial security for the rest of our days, and the ability to assist Thomas and Emily generously if the need ever arose. Rejecting meant clinging to the daily grind that had defined our identity for nearly 4 decades. We have worked tirelessly for 40 years. "William," Sarah said one evening as we sat on our back porch watching fireflies dance. Perhaps it is time to enjoy the fruits of our labor, and maybe this windfall will finally bring Thomas closer to us. In March 2014, we signed the contract. Overnight, William and Sarah Harper became millionaires. Yet we made a deliberate choice to maintain our simple lifestyle. We kept the same ranch-style house, the same reliable sedan, the same routines of grocery shopping on Tuesdays, and attending midweek Bible study. Sarah's wisdom guided us. Money has a way of changing people. William, let us remain who we have always been. The only significant shift was a deepening commitment to Grace Community Church, which we had joined in 2009 after Sarah's successful battle with skin cancer the previous year. Pastor David Edwards and his wife Margaret welcomed us with open arms into a congregation of hard-working, salt-of-the-earth families much like our own. Sarah quickly immersed herself in the women's ministry, organizing potlucks and quilting bees. I took longer to warm to organized religion, but the weekly Bible studies and genuine sense of community eventually won me over. It was in 2009 that we made our first anonymous donation, $200,000, to replace the leaking roof that disrupted services every time a Texas thunderstorm rolled through. Why anonymous, Pastor Edwards asked when we arranged the transfer. I smiled and quoted Matthew 6:3. Let not your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That initial gift marked the beginning of 15 years of silent, steadfast support. New sound system in 2010, complete bathroom renovation in 2011. Purchase of adjacent land for expansion in 2012. Fleet of vans to transport underprivileged children to Sunday school. Every need that arose. Sarah and I met quietly and without fanfare. Thomas was aware we attended church, but treated our growing faith with thinly veiled scorn. Dad, just be careful you don't turn into one of those religious fanatics, he would say whenever the topic arose. What he never comprehended was that our fanaticism came with a price tag in the millions. Between 2009 and 2014 alone, we donated nearly $1 million. After the sale of the markets, our capacity for generosity expanded dramatically. In 2015, we gave $500,000 for a dedicated children's wing. In 2016, $300,000 for state-of-the-art audio and video equipment. In 2017, $700,000 to acquire neighboring properties for future growth. The list continued year after year. The first truly explosive family confrontation erupted in the summer of 2016. Emily, then 5 years old, looked up at me with those wide blue eyes and asked, "Grandpa, can I please spend a whole week at your house during summer break? I want Grandma to teach me how to bake chocolate chip cookies just like she used to make for Daddy." The idea filled my heart with pure joy, a week of storytelling, board games, and creating memories with my granddaughter. Thomas and Laura exchanged a loaded glance I did not like one bit. "Dad, Emily is still much too young to sleep away from home," Thomas said firmly. "She's 5 years old, and your house is literally 20 minutes away," I countered. Laura interjected with an air of superiority. "Her daily routine is very precise, specific meal times, nap schedules, enrichment activities. You simply wouldn't understand how to maintain it." Sarah, unable to stay silent, replied, "Laura, with all due respect, we raised Thomas perfectly well through infancy and childhood. I believe we are more than capable of caring for Emily for 7 short days." Laura's expression turned to ice. "Mrs. Harper, times have changed dramatically. Child-rearing today is far more complex than in your era." Thomas should have defended his parents in that moment. Instead, he sided with his wife. "She's right, Dad. You and Mom don't have experience with modern parenting techniques." The words landed like a slap. We, who had sacrificed everything to give him the very best, were suddenly deemed incompetent to babysit our own granddaughter. For the first time, raw anger toward my son surged through my veins, not mere disappointment, not sadness, but a righteous fury at his betrayal. From that point forward, the relationship deteriorated rapidly. Visits became rarer than rain in a West Texas drought. Phone calls were confined to birthdays and major holidays, and even then they felt obligatory rather than warm. When the four of them did appear, tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Laura's discomfort with our simplicity was no longer subtle. Thomas seemed perpetually distracted, checking emails under the table. Then, in the spring of 2018, catastrophe struck our family a second time. Sarah began experiencing persistent abdominal pain that we initially dismissed as indigestion or stress. When diagnostic tests finally revealed the truth, the oncologist's words fell like a guillotine: advanced stage pancreatic cancer. With aggressive treatment, she might have 6 months to 2 years. Without it, perhaps 3 months. We chose to fight with everything modern medicine could offer: chemotherapy, radiation, experimental protocols, a risky surgery that promised a slim chance of remission. I suspended all outside activities and devoted myself entirely to Sarah's care, driving her to appointments, holding her hand through nausea, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside her hospital bed. During those harrowing months, I discovered who truly cherished us. The Grace Community Church family, mobilized like an army of angels. Pastor Edwards visited weekly, praying over Sarah and bringing communion. The women's ministry organized a meal train that kept our refrigerator stocked. Deacons mowed our lawn. Brothers in the men's group called daily to check in, and Thomas he managed to appear every 14 to 16 days, always hurried, always with a briefcase of excuses, critical work deadlines, client dinners, Laura's family obligations. When he did come, Laura accompanied him but sat in stony silence, her presence more obligation than compassion. On one particularly difficult visit, Thomas offered, "Dad, if you need anything, just let me know." My reply was immediate. "I need you to visit more often. Your mother misses you terribly." "Dad, I have a demanding job. I can't be here every day." Every day I had asked only for more than bi-weekly drive-bys while his mother lay dying. Sarah passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in September 2018, her frail hand clasped in mine, her final breath a whisper: "William, please take care of Thomas. He will still grow up and understand the value of family one day." Even in her last moments, Sarah clung to hope for our son. The wake filled Grace Community Church to overflowing. Pastor Edwards delivered a eulogy that celebrated Sarah's quiet generosity, her boundless love for family, her tireless service to the congregation. People lined up for hours to share stories of how she had sewn quilts for the homeless shelter, organized toy drives at Christmas, sat with the sick long into the night. Thomas arrived late with Laura and Emily, sliding into a back pew and shifting uncomfortably amid the outpouring of affection for the woman who had raised him. At the cemetery, after the final prayer and the crowd dispersed, Thomas approached me beside the freshly turned earth. "Dad, now that Mom is gone, we need to think practically about the future. Maybe it's time to sell this big house and find something smaller, closer to us in the city, less than 24 hours after burying his mother." My son was already calculating how to rearrange my life to suit his convenience. "Thomas, I have no intention of leaving the home where your mother and I built 40 years of memories. But Dad, you'll be rattling around alone in a 3-bedroom house. It's wasteful. Wasteful as though love and loss could be measured in square footage." The months following Sarah's death plunged me into a depression so profound I barely recognized myself. The house echoed with silence. Her sewing machine sat untouched in the corner. Her favorite teacup remained in the cupboard, gathering dust. I went days without showering, weeks without leaving the property. Food lost all taste. Sleep evaded me. Once again, Grace Community Church became my lifeline. Pastor Edwards showed up unannounced with a casserole and a listening ear. The women's ministry left devotional books on my porch. The men's group invited me to breakfast every Saturday until I finally accepted. Slowly, painfully. I returned to Sunday services, finding solace in familiar hymns and the embrace of a community that refused to let me drown. Thomas, during this valley of grief, managed one phone call per week. How are you holding up? Dad, I'm managing. I could use some company. I'll try to swing by this weekend. The weekend invariably brought another excuse work crisis. Emily's dance recital. A weekend getaway with Laura's parents. There was always something more pressing than a widowed father's loneliness. In December 2018, 3 months after Sarah's passing, Emily, now 8 years old and perceptive beyond her years, asked a question that pierced straight to my core. We were video calling because an in-person visit had been too difficult to schedule. Grandpa, why don't we come to your house for dinner anymore, like we did when Grandma was alive before Sarah's illness? Monthly family dinners had been sacred. Now they were extinct. I hesitated, then probed gently. What did your parents tell you, sweetheart? Her little voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Mommy said you get very sad now. And it's not good for children to be around sad people all the time. Laura was using my legitimate grief as a weapon to sever Emily's bond with her grandfather, as if mourning were a contagious disease unfit for a child's eyes. That evening I called Thomas. Your daughter just informed me that you no longer bring her here because my sadness might be harmful to her. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched across the line. Finally, Dad, it's not exactly like that. Then enlighten me, son. What is it exactly like? Another pause. You became deeply depressed after Mom died. Emily is a joyful child. We don't think it's healthy to mix the two. Not healthy to mix as though I were a toxic substance rather than the grandfather who had rocked her to sleep as an infant. In that moment, the one-sidedness of our relationship crystallized. I had spent decades chasing closeness. Thomas had spent them erecting barriers. In the spring of 2019, I conducted a quiet experiment. I ceased initiating contact, no more phone calls, no text messages, no invitations to lunch or church events. I wanted to measure how long it would take for my son to reach out of his own volition. The answer was 92 days. He finally called on the morning of my 68th birthday. Happy birthday, Dad. How have you been? I was getting worried since I hadn't heard from you. Worried after 3 full months of radio silence from a recently widowed father. I assumed you were far too busy to miss my calls. Thomas, the universal excuse surfaced immediately. Work has been insane. Always work. The catch-all justification for familial neglect. From that point forward, our interactions shrank to the bare minimum, a monthly check-in call. Perhaps 2 or 3 in-person visits annually, Christmas morning, my birthday, Father's Day. Each visit lasted no more than 2 hours and carried the weight of obligation. Laura's impatience was palpable. She often waited in the car after the first hour. Emily, now 9, began addressing me with a formality that broke my heart, calling me sir instead of grandpa, as though I were a distant acquaintance rather than the man who had built sandcastles with her on Galveston beaches. During one of those rare visits in the fall of 2021, Emily tilted her head, and asked innocently, "Grandpa, why do you live all alone in this great big house? Isn't it kind of sad?" Children possess a brutal honesty they cannot yet filter. She had no idea she was prodding the rawest wound in my soul, the cavernous loneliness that echoed through every room since Sarah's departure. Later that same year, while grocery shopping at a large chain store, I bumped into Mark Reynolds, a colleague of Thomas's I had met years earlier at a company holiday party. "Mr. Harper, it's been ages. How have you been?" We exchanged pleasantries. And then Mark's expression shifted to confusion. "Funny thing, last month I asked Thomas how his dad was doing, and he told me you had passed away last year. I offered condolences, but here you are." Passed away. My son had fabricated my death to his co-workers to avoid the inconvenience of explaining why his father never appeared at office functions, why he never spoke of family, why he seemed to exist in a vacuum of parental origin. That evening, I confronted him by phone. "Mark Reynolds informed me today that you told him I died last year." A long, pregnant silence. Then a weak deflection, "Dad. That must have been a misunderstanding. I probably said you were going through a rough patch after Mom." No. Mark had been crystal clear. "Thomas, why are you ashamed of me?" Another pause. Then the truth slipped out. "It's just that you and the people in my professional world, they're different universes." Different universes, as though I were an inferior life form unworthy of mingling with his polished corporate colleagues. From that moment, I began observing my son through a new, unflinching lens. No longer the little boy I had tucked in at night, but the man he had become. And what I saw filled me with a profound sorrow, arrogance in his posture, disdain in his tone, a relentless obsession with status and perception. In 2022, Thomas and Laura made the decision to enroll Emily in St. Augustine's Academy, an ultra-elite private school in the most exclusive enclave of Dallas. Tuition exceeded what Sarah and I had spent on Thomas's entire college education. "Emily's future is our absolute top priority," Thomas declared during a tense dinner. "Of course it is," I replied. "Education has always been paramount in our family." "Yes, but the landscape is far more competitive now. Emily needs to be surrounded by peers of her same social and intellectual caliber. Her same social caliber, a not-so-subtle indictment that the Harper lineage was somehow beneath the rarefied air of St. Augustine's." It was in that conversation that the full scope of Thomas's reinvention became undeniable. He had constructed an entirely new identity, one in which his hard-working, faith-filled, modestly successful parents were an embarrassing footnote to be erased. Throughout 2022, Thomas began attending Grace Community Church on an irregular basis, not out of spiritual hunger, but because Laura believed sporadic involvement in community service enhanced their family's public image. They always arrived late, claimed seats in the very back row, and slipped out before the final benediction, avoiding the post-service fellowship where coffee and conversation flowed freely. Thomas greeted church members with polite but distant handshakes. Laura barely concealed her discomfort among the common congregants in their off-the-rack clothing. Pastor Edwards, privy to the growing rift in our family, made multiple gentle attempts to bridge the gap. He invited Thomas and me to join the men's Bible study group on Thursday evenings, suggested we serve together on a weekend outreach to the local homeless shelter, proposed we co-lead a father-son testimony night. Each invitation was met with the same refrain, "Work is swamped. We're traveling that weekend. Emily has a prior commitment." Thomas always had time for everything except meaningful connection with his father. Then, in October 2023, an opportunity arose that briefly rekindled my hope. Emily, now 13 and thriving in middle school, approached me with a school assignment. "Grandpa, I have to do a big genealogy project on family history. Can I come over on Saturday to interview you? I need stories, photos, the whole thing." My heart leapt. 3 uninterrupted hours to share the legacy of hard work, love, and faith that defined the Harper name. She arrived with a spiral notebook, a digital recorder, and an enthusiasm that reminded me so much of Sarah at that age. We sat at the kitchen table for hours. I told her about my parents' struggles on the cotton farms, about meeting her grandmother at the grocery counter, about the sleepless nights praying the bank would approve our first business loan. I showed her faded photographs, our simple wedding, the grand opening of the first market, Thomas as a toddler riding on my shoulders through the aisles. Emily's eyes grew wide with wonder. "Grandpa, I had no idea you and Grandma were actual entrepreneurs. Dad never tells the story like this." I smiled softly. "Your father knows every detail, sweetheart. Perhaps he simply doesn't find them as interesting as you do." On Monday evening, my phone rang with Thomas's name flashing on the screen. His voice was tight with fury. "Dad, what exactly did you tell Emily on Saturday?" I told her the truth, the full, unvarnished history of our family. "You filled her head with tales of grocery stores and scraping by and building a business from nothing." She came home talking about money and legacy, Thomas. "Those are facts, not fairy tales. It is her heritage. She does not need to know those details. It will create unrealistic expectations about inheritance, about lifestyle. We are raising her to have her feet firmly on the ground, not to fantasize about some windfall." In that moment, the final piece clicked into place. Thomas did not merely wish to keep me at arm's length. He wanted to obliterate our family narrative entirely. He wanted Emily to grow up believing her grandparents were ordinary, asset-free retirees with no accomplishments worthy of note, because any hint of wealth might disrupt the carefully curated image of self-made success he projected to the world. A few weeks later, during one of their increasingly rare visits, Laura cornered me in the hallway with a saccharine smile. "Mr. Harper, have you ever considered moving into a luxury retirement community? They offer companionship, gourmet dining, organized activities, round-the-clock medical care. It would be so much better for someone your age living alone." I was 72, in excellent health, mentally sharp, fully independent, and my daughter-in-law was suggesting I voluntarily check myself into what amounted to a gilded warehouse for the elderly. "Laura, I am perfectly content in the home where I raised my family. I understand, but you are getting older. If something were to happen, a fall, a medical emergency, who would be there? We work long hours. Emily has school. We simply cannot be available 24 hours a day. Cannot be available for the father-in-law who had worked sunrise to sunset to provide the very foundation of their comfortable life." The subtext was crystal clear. They wanted me out of the way, conscience salved by the illusion of professional care, and most insidiously positioned to access my assets should I ever be deemed incapacitated. That same night, I placed an urgent call to my attorney of 20 years, Dr. Henry Campos. "Henry, I need to update my estate plan immediately." "Of course." "William, any specific concerns? I want ironclad provisions that make it virtually impossible for anyone to challenge my mental competency or interfere with my financial autonomy while I remain lucid." Henry understood instantly. "Family troubles. Let us just say my son has developed an intense interest in my long-term well-being." The revised will included multiple safeguards. Any attempt to declare me incapacitated required unanimous medical opinions from 3 independent, board-certified geriatric psychiatrists. Any effort to access or redirect my assets triggered automatic disinheritance of the offending party. But I was not finished. I decided to administer one final, decisive test to reveal Thomas's true character once and for all. In November 2023, I phoned him. Thomas, I am considering a major donation to the church, $500,000, to construct a new daycare facility for working families. I wanted to discuss it with you first, out of respect. The line went silent for a full 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Dad, are you certain that is an enormous sum? Thomas, I am 72 years old. I cannot take money with me when I go. If it can do good now, why hoard it? But think of the family. Think of Emily's future college, graduate school, a home of her own one day. That money could secure everything for her. So the mask slipped entirely. Are you asking me not to give away my own money to a cause I believe in? It is not that. Dad, it is just $500,000 to a church. It is not a sound investment. It is essentially throwing money away. Throwing money away. My son viewed aiding a religious institution and the vulnerable families it served as fiscal irresponsibility. In that single conversation, I understood that Thomas was not merely ashamed of my lifestyle, he was ashamed of my values, my faith, my belief that wealth unused for good is wealth wasted. I spent the entire month of December 2023 meticulously preparing what I privately dubbed Revelation Sunday. I compiled 15 years of donation records, drafted a heartfelt speech on gratitude and stewardship, and coordinated with Pastor Edwards to make the announcement during the first Sunday service of the month. I would publicly donate an additional $200,000 this time in my own name so that the congregation would finally know the identity of their mysterious benefactor. But Thomas acted first, in a way I could never have anticipated. On Sunday, December 3rd, 2023, I arrived at the church an hour early to finalize details with Pastor Edwards. Thomas, Laura, and Emily were already seated in their customary back row perch. The service began normally worship songs, announcements, the pastor's sermon on the theme of do not judge by outward appearance. Midway through the message, Pastor Edwards quoted Proverbs. Sometimes those who appear to have the least are the very ones with the most to give. At that precise moment, Thomas stood abruptly. I assumed he was preparing to exit early as usual, but instead he marched straight to the platform. Pastor Edwards paused, startled. Thomas, is something wrong? Thomas seized the microphone with both hands. Pastor, you speak of not judging by appearances, but a truth must be told today. My blood turned to ice. That man in the front row, he continued, pointing accusingly at me, is my father, and I know who he really is. The sanctuary fell into a hush so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. He is a fraud, Thomas declared, his voice swelling with conviction. A con artist who preys on the goodwill of this congregation, borrowing money from anyone naive enough to lend it, never repaying a dime. He is penniless, destitute, yet he sits here week after week pretending to be a pious believer just to scam more of you. Gasps rippled through the pews, heads swiveled, whispers erupted like sparks. Emily tugged my sleeve again, her eyes brimming with tears. Grandpa, something inside me, decades of patience, unconditional love, and forgiveness shattered irreparably. In its place rose a calm, steely resolve I barely recognized. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked deliberately to the platform. Thomas watched me approach, a smirk of triumph on his face. Certain I would stammer excuses or shrink in shame, I took the microphone from his hand with steady fingers. Pastor Edwards, I said, my voice ringing clear and unwavering through the sound system. I believe the moment has arrived for the revelation we discussed. Pastor Edwards, quick on his feet, retrieved a thick manila envelope from the pulpit desk. "Brothers and sisters," he announced, "for 15 years, this church has been blessed by anonymous donations from a servant who signs his gifts only a child of God. To date, that servant has contributed exactly $2,300,000. The congregation erupted in murmurs of astonishment. 2.3 million was an astronomical figure for a modest community church. The state-of-the-art sound system you hear through today, his gift. The building addition, where our children learn Bible stories, his gift. The vans that pick up kids from the projects every Sunday, his gift. The pantry that feeds 50 struggling families each month. The college scholarships for our youth, all of it exists because of this one humble brother." Thomas's smirk faltered. The color drained from his face as realization dawned. Pastor Edwards turned and extended a hand toward me. "Church, allow me to introduce the man behind 15 years of miracles, Mr. William James Harper." 300 people rose as one in a thunderous standing ovation. Women wept openly. Men shouted Amen and Hallelujah. Children, who had grown up in the church, rushed the platform to hug me. Deacons I had known for decades pumped my hand with tears in their eyes. And Thomas, he stood frozen beside me, microphone dangling limply at his side. The expression of a man who has just witnessed his own public execution. I looked him directly in the eyes and addressed the congregation and him without raising my voice. "Thomas, you have just called a scammer the man who paid for the construction of this very sanctuary. You branded as fake the supporter of every ministry your daughter has ever enjoyed watching from the back row. You claimed I have nowhere to drop dead. Yet my net worth exceeds anything you could amass in 10 lifetimes of your corporate climbing." The sanctuary fell silent enough to hear a pin drop. "Today," I continued, "I make another donation, $200,000 toward the new daycare center we have dreamed of for years. But this time it will not be anonymous. It will be publicly recorded in the name of William Harper, so that every soul here knows the elderly gentleman in the front pew never borrowed a single penny from anyone in this room." The applause that followed shook the rafters. People surged forward to embrace me, to thank me, to praise God for the revelation. Thomas stumbled down the platform steps, face ashen, and made a beeline for the exit. Laura scrambled after him. Clutching her purse, Emily broke free from her mother's grasp, ran back to me, and threw her arms around my waist. "Grandpa, are you really rich?" I knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her tear-streaked cheek. "Sweetheart, I have always been rich in the love of this church, rich in the legacy your grandmother and I built, and richest of all in the privilege of being your grandfather." That afternoon, my phone buzzed with 23 voicemail messages from Thomas, each more desperate than the last. Pleading ignorance, begging forgiveness, promising change. I deleted them all without listening to a single one. There is a vast chasm between a mistake born of genuine ignorance and an act of calculated malice. Thomas did not humiliate me because he lacked facts. He humiliated me because he believed me poor, weak, and expendable, and thought there would be no repercussions for treating me as such. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire through Dallas. Local television stations ran human interest segments, "The Secret Millionaire of Grace Community Church." The Dallas Morning News published a full-page profile from cardboard suitcase to kingdom builder, the quiet philanthropy of William Harper. Radio hosts invited me for interviews. Strangers stopped me in grocery aisles to shake my hand. Overnight, I transformed from an anonymous retiree to a local legend. Thomas appeared uninvited at my doorstep the following Thursday evening. Alone, eyes red from either crying or sleeplessness. Dad, I committed the worst sin a son could commit. Please, please forgive me. I studied him for a long moment, the expensive haircut, the tailored suit, the manicured hands that had never known calluses. I saw not my little boy, but a 40-year-old stranger who had sacrificed family on the altar of social approval. Thomas, I said with a calm that surprised even me, you did not make a mistake. You revealed your true character, and the man you revealed is not someone I wish to have in my life. Dad, I was foolish. Immature, you are 40 years old. Immaturity is no longer an excuse. It is a choice. You had 4 decades to be a decent son. You had 5 years since your mother's death to support me in grief. Instead, you chose shame, distance, and ultimately, public slander. He left that night and has never darkened my door again. 1 week later, I returned to Dr. Campos's office and executed the final revision to my estate plan. 50% of my net worth, now valued at just over $7 million after taxes and prior donations, would transfer upon my death to Grace Community Church for ongoing ministry and expansion. 30% would fund an educational trust for Emily, accessible only when she reaches age 25, to be used exclusively for college, graduate school, or vocational training of her choice. 20% would establish a perpetual fund for citywide social program food banks, youth mentorship, addiction recovery. And Thomas, he inherits precisely 0. Let him earn his own way, as I earned mine. Dr. Campos personally delivered the certified notification to Thomas in his glass-walled corner office downtown. According to Henry, my son experienced a full emotional collapse, sobbing, pleading, threatening legal action. None of it moved me. That same evening, Thomas arrived at my house in a state of desperation I had never witnessed. Dad, you cannot do this. I have a family to support Emily. Emily is provided for beyond anything you could imagine. I interrupted. She will have every opportunity without ever depending on your lifestyle choices. You, however, who stood before 300 worshippers and called your father a destitute scammer, will now learn the value of $1 earned through honest labor. His final salvo was the low blow. You are a cruel, vindictive old man. Mom would be ashamed of what you have become. The words hung in the air like poison. I felt the last fragile thread between us snap. Thomas, your mother would be ashamed, yes. Ashamed that she raised a son capable of humiliating his father in the house of God to score points with a crowd. Ashamed that her dying wish for family unity was trampled beneath your ambition. He stormed out, tires squealing as he peeled away from the curb. I have not heard from him since. Today, 1 year later, my life bears little resemblance to the shadows of 2023. I serve on the Elder Council at Grace Community Church, helping chart the future of ministries that will outlive us all. Universities invite me to guest lecture on ethical entrepreneurship and strategic philanthropy. Civic organizations honor me with awards I never sought. I mentor young business owners over coffee, sharing the lessons Mr. Tanaka instilled in me decades ago. Emily visits twice a week now, chauffeured by a subdued Laura who treats me with the deference once reserved for her own parents. We bake cookies, play board games, pore over old photo albums. She calls me Grandpa again, and the sound is music to my soul. Thomas remains a ghost, absent from holidays, birthdays, church, some wounds, I have learned, are meant to scar, The deepest irony, Thomas spent years mocking my excessive religiosity, rolling his eyes at my tithes, my service, my quiet donations to church causes. He never grasped that my generosity was never about religion in the abstract. It was about character. It was about honoring Sarah's memory, about embodying the truth that those blessed with abundance bear a sacred duty to lift those with less. He judged my humility as weakness, my simplicity as lack of ambition. He believed he could discard me like obsolete furniture because I appeared dependent, needy, inferior. But humility is not frailty. It is a deliberate choice. And when that choice is mistaken for permission to humiliate, the reckoning is swift and merciless. I harbor no remorse for the consequences Thomas now faces. He learned publicly, painfully, that words have weight, that slander carries a price, that disrespect boomerangs to its source. Yet every act of justice extracts an emotional toll. The infinitely patient father who once absorbed every slight died on that platform. In his place stands a man who commands respect, not only through love but, when necessary, through the quiet authority of unyielding boundaries. I confess I have come to appreciate this newer version of myself. I relish being admired for my accomplishments and, yes, occasionally feared for my resolve. I no longer tolerate disrespect. I confront it with the calm certainty of a man who knows his worth. My only lingering regret is the collateral damage to Emily, who now witnesses open warfare between her father and grandfather. Yet perhaps this, too, is a mercy in disguise. Perhaps she will learn earlier than most that respect for elders is non-negotiable, that family is forged in character rather than blood, that legacy is measured by what we give, not what we hoard. 2 months ago, an attorney representing Thomas contacted me with a proposal: full reconciliation, public apology, and reinstatement in the will in exchange for my signature on a revised document. My response was succinct. Inform your client that William Harper does not negotiate dignity. Respect is earned through consistent action, not purchased with promises. If this story has found its way to you, perhaps it is because you needed a mirror held to your own relationships. Maybe you have a parent, grandparent, or elder in your life whom you underestimate because of appearance, modest circumstances, or advanced age. Maybe you have dismissed their stories as irrelevant, their faith as outdated, their love as clingy. Pause and consider. You might be scorning the very person who has the most wisdom to impart, the deepest reservoir of unconditional love to offer. You might be squandering irreplaceable years that can never be reclaimed. And remember this sobering truth: one day, you will be the elder. One day you will rely on the patience, respect, and affection of younger generations. The way you treat the aged today is the blueprint for how you will be treated tomorrow. Thomas learned that lesson in the harshest arena imaginable. I pray you absorb it through gentler means. But if ever you find yourself tempted to publicly shame someone you deem beneath you, recall the story of William Harper. Recall that appearances are masterful deceivers. Recall that even the most patient heart has limits. And above all, recall that some mistakes carve wounds too deep for any apology to heal. Thomas will never again be my heir. He will never regain my respect. He will never be welcomed across my threshold. Because once a person reveals their core in front of 300 witnesses in the house of God, you must believe them. Thomas showed me exactly who he is on that Sunday in December 2023, and I have chosen to honor that revelation with permanent boundaries. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a man who finally understands that kindness alone does not always command respect. Sometimes steel must glint beneath the smile. I see a man who knows forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation, and that toxic relatives can and sometimes must be pruned from the family tree, even when they share your blood. Comment below if you have ever misjudged someone by outward appearance. Share if you have ever regretted the way you treated an elder. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I truly delight in knowing who sits on the other side of these stories told by a 72-year-old Texan who learned, late but definitively, that lambs occasionally must bare teeth to earn the respect that gentleness could not secure. Subscribe to Revenge with Thomas. Tap that like button and stay tuned for the next chapter. Trust me, many more stories wait in the wings, each one a lesson wrapped in the raw cloth of real life.